Donald Trump is smart to fear the Mueller report. It makes sense that he's preoccupied with defending himself in the wake of Mueller's findings. The fact that he's screaming bloody murder right now and tweeting with such nervousness shows he, more than others, even his critics, grasp the danger to Donald Trump from Mueller's central finding that the Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. What we're witnessing right now, I believe, is a president who knows history will chalk up his election in 2016 to the help he got from the Russians. Trump's fear is that his presidency will have an asterisk next to it in the history books, like a major leaguer whose performance at the plate is chalked up to drug use. As multiple witnesses told the special counsel, the president is afraid, quote, that reports of Russian election interference might lead the public to question the legitimacy of his election. And today, new reporting suggests that the president's insecurity is so profound that it's causing the White House to turn a blind eye to the Russian threat coming in 2020. The New York Times reports that before she was fired, Kirstjen Nielsen tried to focus the White House on one of her highest priorities as Homeland Security Secretary, preparing for new and different Russian forms of interference in the 2020 election. However, Trump's chief of staff told her not to bring it up in front of the president. According to the New York Times chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney made clear that Mr. Trump still equated any public discussion of malign Russian election activity with questions about the legitimacy of his victory. The rebuff makes clear that his administration's posture toward Russia is see no evil, hear no evil. And this story comes as Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and top advisor, downplayed Russia's unprecedented role in the 2016 election. Yesterday, Jared said the investigation of Russian interference was worse than the interference itself. Let's watch.
I think the investigations and all of the speculation that's happened for the last 2 years has had a much harsher impact on our democracy than a couple of Facebook ads. Now, if you look at the magnitude of what they did and what they accomplished, I think the ensuing investigations have been way more harmful to our country.
But this wasn't just a couple of Facebook ads, as he put it. Again, the Mueller report made clear, this is the lines for the history books. The Russian government interfered in the 2016 presidential election in sweeping and systematic fashion. In fact, it's the leading line of the whole report. I'm joined right now by Ben Rhodes, former Deputy National Security Advisor under President Obama. Yamiche Alcindor, White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour. Charlie Sykes is the editor-in-chief of The Bulwark. I want to start with you, Ben, on this line. I have been trying to figure out for 2 weeks why this guy has behaved so wacky lately if he said he won in the Mueller report. And I'm thinking back, wait a minute, what does he really care more about? His legitimacy. I won, Mommy. I won. I did it. Well, no, this says you did it with some help from Moscow.
Yeah, well, first of all, at no stage has he acted like an innocent man. I think that, as you said, just confirming the reality of Russian interference does call into question the legitimacy of that victory, in part because what gets to the core of our democracy more than whether or not you're aided by a foreign power, a foreign adversary, in order to get into that office. I think the more concerning thing, Chris, though, is maybe he wants him to help him again. When you have Rudy Giuliani out there saying it's okay to accept Russian help, what you're essentially saying is, hey, Russia, here's a blinking green light. Come back in and help us again in 2020.
Charlie, what do you think about this? I'm trying to figure out a little bit of psychobabble here, but the importance of the psychobabble in this case is understanding Trump because he has fired Kirstjen Nielsen. What was her last name? Nielsen. Of course, they're gone. Yeah, Nielsen, of course. And he seems to not want to hear it anywhere within his councils. He doesn't want to have anybody. Mick Mulvaney say, don't bring that up. He doesn't like that.
Yeah. This is like FDR after Pearl Harbor saying, I don't want to hear about the Japanese. Don't talk to me about the Japanese or the Germans. Look, this is a part of the Mueller report that I'm glad is getting attention. I think was overlooked. The voluminous documentation of the extent and the scope of the Russian attack, and that it's not over. This is not looking just to the past. It is ongoing. And given the return on investment of their interference in the 2016 election, what we're going to see next year may be even broader and more dramatic. So the question is this president going to do anything about it? Is he going to mobilize this government to protect our democracy? And I think this is something that Congress really has to look into because, I get the focus on the obstruction of justice, which I think is important, and the coordination with the Trump campaign. But the reality is there is no doubt this country was attacked, is under attack and will be attacked, and the president doesn't want to hear about it. That's a problem.
You know, Charlie, the great FDR quote that is better, I think, even than the one you mentioned was, he said, never mention the word rope in a family where there's been a hanging. And I think he is really sensitive to you, Mish. He does not want talking about the Russians and what they did so clearly to help him.
It's because it goes to the core of his biggest fear, which is that he won't be seen as somebody who rightly should be president. The president is really someone who is focused on his personal issues, and I think the White House would say, don't look at our rhetoric, look at what we've done. But when you have Jared Kushner out there calling this a couple Facebook ads, what we know is that this was not a couple Facebook ads. Not only was it something on social media, but there were protests, there were real protests set up. There was also websites set up to target African Americans in some cases, telling them not to vote. There were so many things that Russia did. But I know I've been talking to White House sources about this, and they say, one, Mick Mulvaney doesn't remember telling Kirstjen Nielsen this. And that
can't remember. Well, that's a similar pattern. I don't remember.
They cannot remember. They also, I've talked to some sources at the DHS, they say, take this with a grain of salt, because now that she's not in DHS anymore, she's someone who wants to look at her own reputation and her own legacy. So there could be allies doing that. But the big issue here is, of course, that we all have heard the president over the last couple of years say, you know what, I'm not sure if Russia has a real big impact.
Could be anybody.
When there are so many intelligence agencies which have been telling us for months and even years that they did have an impact.
And then, of course, Robert Mueller's report comes out and confirms, doubles down on all the 17 intelligence agencies that said so before. And by the way, those who doubt that the little Russian help, like bringing up those embarrassing emails out of the DNC and all that stuff, and Robert Podesta and John Podesta's stuff and all that stuff with Palmieri and all that stuff was embarrassing. We all knew those stories. They got out because of their hacking of the DNC and Podesta. I'm just looking at these numbers. Trump didn't win by a landslide. He won Pennsylvania by 0.7 of 1%. He won Michigan by 0.3 of 1%. He won Wisconsin by 0.7. Yes, he won. Jefferson was right. You win, you win. But he won such a close election, he must wonder, if he doesn't get reelected, how the history book's going to treat him. A guy who won a fluke election because he got Russian help. Anyway, most alarming in light of the president's continued cover-up is that the Russian threat to American democracy still looms. According to the New York Times, one senior official described Homeland Security officials as adamant that the United States government needed to significantly step up its efforts to urge the American public and U.S. companies to block foreign influence campaigns. But the department was stymied by the White House's refusal to even discuss it, the official said. As a result, the official said, the government was failing to adequately inform Americans about continuing influence efforts. Ben, you've been in the business, not politics, government.
Yeah.
In this case, government. The number one job of American president is to protect us.
Yeah. And protect our democracy, right? And this is a blinking green light, again, not just to Russia, but other foreign adversaries could be looking at this and looking at us not making these preparations and not taking defense of our democracy. And if you're China or you're Iran, in addition to Russia, you're thinking, well, I'm going to come in too. I'm going to have my own foreign influence operation in your election. Yeah. And they're getting an open door. The Trump people are holding the door open for foreign adversaries to attack our elections. And the reality is we should be changing our laws. It should be illegal to do what these people did in the Mueller report. I was on a national presidential campaign. I didn't need to meet with the representatives of a foreign adversary. That should not be. I think the only reason it wasn't illegal yet is because nobody ever imagined that any nominee would do that. We have to be securing our election infrastructure. What if the Russians actually tried to change the vote to help Donald Trump?
Well, I want to ask you, Charlie, if you were a reasonably concerned American official in national security area, what would you do to smack the Russians back into their corner so they wouldn't try it again? How do you teach them a lesson they don't forget?
Well, the first thing you do is you understand that you're in the middle of cyber war, and that the president is the commander-in-chief of that war. Because Ben is absolutely right. This is what is terrifying about all of this, is the signal that he is sending, saying that it is a hoax. We're having the secretary of everything, the boy genius Jared Kushner, say it's just a few Facebook ads. Because, of course, what you have now is the president not only not leading the country in defense, but providing sort of a cover to minimize the danger of all of this. And that is actually the kind of thing that ought to be bipartisan concern. Okay, if Republicans want to provide cover against impeachment proceedings, that is one thing. But they have to take legislative steps to make sure that, in fact, this country is protected. That is the #1 responsibility of the federal government and the president. And all of this rhetoric that you're getting from the White House makes you wonder, are we committed to doing all this? I mean, one of the first things that John Bolton did as national security advisor was to abolish the position of cybersecurity coordinator in the White House. The Mueller report says that Donald Trump brought Corey Lewandowski in and wanted him to go to Jeff Sessions, tell him to unrecuse, and limit the investigation to only future attacks, which would have let everyone off the hook for the 2016 attacks. All of this, I think, is a blinking green light. It is an invitation. And I think the Democrats, whatever they do in terms of hearings, ought to start teeing up legislation to make it absolutely clear that this sort of behavior is not acceptable.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.